Great, thank you. Just let me get down here. Okay. Did you try to call me?
Yeah. Can I do that? What's that? Okay.
It could also be,
All right, as we get started, just looking at the attendee list, we see names. If your phone number ends in 3976, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Sagan Faulkner at Invita.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Sagan. Appreciate that. All right, Madam Chair, I will turn it over to you to call to order and begin the meeting.
Okay, I will call the meeting to order, and apparently we do now have a quorum. And did the members online introduce themselves? If they could do that, that would be great. Maybe Jen?
Good morning, I'm Jen Nimmo. I'm with Colorado Community Health Alliance, the RAY, for Medicaid in Park, Teller, and El Paso County.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Hi, Rosemary Jaramillo with the Alzheimer's Association.
Thank you. And if we could have those here in the room, and we'll start over here.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Gordon Rick, City of Fountain.
Laura Chronic, Town of Monument.
B. Babbitt, Northern El Paso County.
Tom Lathrop, Colorado Springs Senior Center.
Great, thank you. And if we can have some agenda approval, a motion to accept the.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, I want to just jump in real quick. Because the Colorado Springs Fire Department is not presenting today, we had talked about having Jen, our RAC member, present about her organization, CCHA. So I'd like to make that motion to put that on the agenda after Tom presents on the Senior Center, that we would have Jen talk about
Great.
CCHA. So I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you. If I had gotten here earlier, I was going to ask you that.
So, Madam Chair, this is Jared Berner. I would just like to point out that we did not notice that as an agenda item. And so per Colorado Open Meetings Law, within 24 hours, I would recommend against that for today, just because it wasn't properly noticed. Fine.
All right, so Madam Chair, with that open meeting rule that we have to follow, the only presentation we'll have today is from Colorado Springs Senior Center.
Great, thank you.
So we ask for a second on the agenda.
So can we have a second on the agenda?
Second.
Thank you. And then agenda is accepted for everybody to vote. Maybe raise your hands. Great, agenda is accepted. And then we'll move down to consent items. And do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the previous RAC meeting?
Madam Chair, Gordon Rick, move to approve minutes from the previous RAC meeting.
And do I have a second?
Laura, second.
Thank you. And then all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
And if we go to number 4, which is public comments, I'd like to ask Jared if we have anyone who wants to do public comments.
Oh, go ahead, Jared.
I was about to say, we did have one request for public comment. He is in the room if he wants to go up to the podium at this time. While he's making his way to the room, I'll ask anyone who's online who would like to provide a public comment to please use the raise hand function at this time, and we'll add you to the queue.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to this committee, and just to share with you that I'm very excited about an event that's coming up called Silver Key Is, And yesterday we had our kickoff event, of which we had just shy of 80 people attend. Those folks that attended were committing, hopefully a few of them, actually many of them, have committed to be what's called table captains for our event. The table captain event is really different than maybe what you've seen in other areas, in that we have a way to be able to get the word out. We're not asking table captains to do a high pressure of getting people to that event. In the electronic version, Jared will be sending out, I believe, the link that you would be able to RSVP if you want to attend the event. What I'll share with you at the conversation that we had there, it was very, very clear that people are very, very concerned about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. There's no doubt that people are anxious, as we all should be, I believe, with the information that's out there or the unknowns. And so one of the things that came forward from this conversation yesterday is that folks are really hoping and really I would say, because we had a number of sisters from a lot of different churches praying, that what happens is that we really bring together the voice of the older adult in this year. What I stressed in that meeting is that this is not about necessarily just a fundraiser for the people that we know. It's really about bringing new people to the organization or through the interest in older adult care. So for that reason, one of the things about the Silver Key Is event is what we want to do is take advantage is that there's over 750,000 people in the Pikes Peak region. And I'm confident that there's 500 people that do not know necessarily what Silver Key is, or do not know necessarily the plight of the older adult that's happening in the idea related to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And so what we want to do is engage that larger opportunity so that we can really cascade a larger amplified voice about what the needs are, how we make changes, how we influence the way that we improve the older adult experience so that we truly are one of the greatest places in the community, in the state to age, and maybe even the nation. I think we can push for that too. To that end, I want to share with you that on May 15th, we have our senior summit at the Great Wolf Lodge. All of you are invited to the Great Wolf Lodge on that day. Our mayor from Colorado Springs is going to be one of the breakout sessions talking about a 45-minute town hall to be able to share a little bit more about what his ideas strategically are for Colorado Springs. And I think we'll be able to cascade that through other communities as well from that knowledge. The actual breakfast event is June 26th. At the Marriott. And again, you'll get this information from Jared. If you want to attend, you're invited to attend. QR code, use that. But my real hope is that you can invite friends and family who may not know about the plight of the older adult or have limited awareness about what the needs are, so we can educate and make our voice heard for those that need us to advocate for their needs. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yep, perfect timing. And now we'll move down to number 5, which is our action items. And we do have one action item today. And Melissa, maybe you can talk about that.
So we do have a recommendation from the Park County Commissioners for Ms. Sheila Williams to become a member with the RAC. It is an appointment, so really, truly, the RAC does not need to take any action on it. Just recognize that this appointment has been put through from the county commissioners in Park County. And Sheila is no stranger to serving and supporting older adults in the region. She has been on the Park County Senior Coalition board for quite a while. So she's shepherded that board through many changes and evolutions up there. She has also served on the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments Citizen Advisory Council up until recently. And so she is now going to be the appointee from Park County. And so we'll look forward to meeting her in the near future. We also have another person. I'll bring this up during the membership committee though. So I'm going to stop at that point. And if anyone has comments or questions about the new appointment with Sheila, Ms. Sheila Williams.
And if they do, we can hold off till
Okay.
membership committee.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
Number 6 is presentations. And now I understand we only have one presentation this morning, and that is from the YMCA and the Senior Center. I think it's an update on what's happening there. As long as you need.
So it's been a long time coming. We're pretty excited that we're getting a brand new building. And so I wanted to share with you what's going on, how quickly we're going to be in the new senior center. We've already been out for a year and a half, still doing our programs because we're over at the downtown YMCA and also over at Westside Community Center. It's getting much closer and we're getting so excited. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is what the floor plan looks like for the new building. It is 23,000 square feet instead of the 17,000 that we had, which, as you know, was a converted grocery store, 1986, which was a great, serviced the community well. But because it was built in 1952 and that whole shopping center, it needed a lot of work. And so we're very, very thankful that the city of Colorado Springs saw that it was a priority to build a new senior center. I do have our magazines here, so if you want to take one of those, on the back side of the magazine, I also put this image, and also there's some of the render images of what the new senior center is going to look like as well. So this is what it's going to look like. Probably the only big change from this image is you're going to see where it says senior center on the sign. Nancy Lewis's name will be prominent on all of the signage. So we also got some money to build the senior center along with what the city had allotted. And that came from the Lyda Hill Foundation and in Nancy Lewis's name. So you'll see her name on there. So. There we go. And that's an image of what it's going to look like in the lobby area when you go in. That's in our fitness room. And again, that's the lobby area. Doesn't it look awesome? Looks like a lot of fun. And then that's our multi-purpose room that has a stage area, which is about 1 foot high, has a couple steps to get up there. And yes, there is a ramp to get up there as well. It is laid out. You kind of see that the courts are kind of laid out for pickleball if we were going to have some pickleball in there, which we will do. I don't know how many days or how many hours, but we're going to figure that out. And of course, you notice that all of it is really high ceilings, which will enable us to have, games, things like that as well. So this is the paper in June of last year. Talking about that they're finally getting started on the demo. And this is when they're just starting to take it down. And I've got several images here. You can kind of see what that process looked like. And then this is the groundbreaking ceremony where I had said a few words there. And then, of course, we had to do the shovels, with the mayor and other different dignitaries around town, as far as some city people as well. And Boyd Williams, who's the CEO of the YMCA, of course, was involved in that. Now they're digging for the foundation, putting that in. And you can kind of see what that looks like. So this is me standing up to the top of the foundation. So because that's all dug down, and then now this becomes the floor level. And so when you walk in now, the top of that wood is where your feet would go as you walk in. And then they started with the steel. So it's a lot of steel for the whole structure. And then the parking lot, which again, the parking lot is much larger than what we had, triple the amount of parking than we had before, which was our biggest complaint, because we were sharing about 70 spaces with all the other businesses that were there. And there were many times when people were parking up and down the street on Caramillo and Hancock. And as you would guess, for folks that have a walker or need help, that's a long way to go to get to the front door of the senior center. So that has been solved. There are more than, I think it's 120 spots that are within 200 feet of our front door, which is really nice. So they're working on steel. This is what the building looks like. I'm just going to kind of go through some of these quick, and then I may mention a few things as we go on. So that's the plumbing. And then they started framing things out on the outside. That's a retaining wall that they did along Caramillo to make the whole lot level. And that's the framing on the inside of all the walls and everything. And then they started the brickwork. These are the heating and air units that are on top of the roof now. There's 5 of those, which is very different than what we had before. That's an example of the bricks. And that's the mosaic design on the outside of the building. So this is at the corner of Caramillo and Hancock where they started. And then you can see all along Hancock, they've completed all the brickwork. And then they're coming around the south now. This picture is from Tuesday this week, as these images are as well. So you can see they've already started drywall. And then there's some tape work done in there. I expect that the drywall will be completed sometime early next week. Then they're going to be doing painting for probably 2 or 3 weeks, into April, and then they'll start cabinetry, and then they'll do flooring. Things are moving right along. And then once they do finish the outside of the brick, which will probably be in the next 2 or 3 weeks, then they'll start putting in windows and the doors. They're also going to start more on the parking area. So you're going to see a lot of changes in a very quick amount of time. I think by the time we get into May and June, when you drive by, it'll really look like it's coming together. So this is the lobby area. You can see there's insulation in the walls, and it really gives you an idea how big and massive that area is. So it's pretty exciting. This is the last image here. So who are we? So we're an activity center for seniors 55 and over, although our average is more like 75, because as you would guess, most people are still working in their 50s and 60s after they're not retiring until a little bit later. So that would be the reason. The breakdown is 70-30, more women than men, as you would expect that too. Over 3,000 active patrons currently. Now, not all 3,000 are at the senior center on a regular basis. I'd say we're probably seeing, since the pandemic, about 800 or so that are on a regular basis that are using the senior center for our activities and classes and day trips and all the things that we do. The greatest thing about the senior center is there's no monthly fee. So you just got to be 55. And so you don't have to have a monthly fee like you do at the YMCA. Even though we're operated by the YMCA, we have a different business model. So getting that word out there is really important, just so that people understand that. Yes, you can come. Yes, you can be involved. We have a lot of free things, but you also got to pay individually for the classes that you want to take. And we try to keep that at a nominal fee so that it can be affordable. And we also do scholarships. So scholarship, if somebody's on a fixed income, to be able to help them out with that. Most people that are on scholarships, we're giving them about a 75% discount. Not bad for a year. And then they provide their income information the next year, and then we do it again. It's very common. We want to get more people on scholarship, and we want to make sure people know about it. If you happen to be over 90, it's 100% scholarship. Everything is free. And you'd be surprised how many people are over 90 and come. One of the big things that was an eye-opener for me is, since we've been at the YMCA there downtown, there are so many seniors that use the downtown YMCA. And they still look at us in our little desk and they think, I'm not ready for the senior center, and they're probably 80. Because there's this perception of what the senior center is, and it's just not the same thing that their perception is. And so getting the word out of what we do and the kind of things that we offer, Because even though we might have some of the same kind of exercise classes that you might find in a YMCA, you're not going to take a watercolor class at the YMCA, or you're not going to hear different lectures on different topics, or have learn to play bridge, or come to a dance, and tip the band and have refreshments and do day trips. I mean, there's a lot of other things outside of what the YMCA offers, and we just want to get the word out about that. So the Senior Center is a partnership between the city of Colorado Springs, so they're the owner, and then the YMCA is the operator. So that's been the case since 2015. So a pretty long time. Before that, originally it was under Parks and Rec, and then it was under Housing Authority for a time, and then now it's the YMCA. It makes great sense. It really helps us in a lot of different ways to reach the community that maybe we didn't have some other avenues, which we're pretty excited about. So we're a place to connect with people and get active. We're a place to discover new interests, knowledge, and talents, a place to enjoy a life full of friendships, acceptance, and a variety of options. There's so much to do after retirement. And that's what people need to know, that they can have a place that they can go to. And that's what's so wonderful about the Senior Center. So we save lives in a way that the people are stuck. They're not really sure, how to get out of their home and have a place to go to. And there are other senior centers, sure, not in Colorado Springs proper. I know that, Jason with Silver Key, they had the one up in Monument, and I know they're working up some other options to continue that. There's a great one in Woodland Park. There's also a really good one down in Fountain Valley. Could there be more senior centers in Colorado Springs? Yes. I think we're a big enough population that we need some more. We need, that are specific for seniors. Sure, there are community centers for families, and some seniors also are included in some of those places. Why not have some more senior centers? So maybe with the success that we're going to see with this place, that the city will also see that there's a need. So who do we serve? There's some fun pictures. What do you do? Well, I mentioned we have exercise, we got dance class. Yes, you can do a ballroom dance class or a line dance class. We have art classes. We do gemstone faceting. What's that? Well, that's grinding down stones, learning how to do the actual facets. It's maybe starting with glass to kind of figure things out, and then maybe actually using a jewel and creating some jewelry. So that's kind of an interesting thing. We used to have chair caning. I don't know if we're going to be able to bring that back at some point, but that was an interesting thing as well. We have different folks that come in and talk about health topics, other lifelong learning kind of topics, where it could be cooking, could be on finance, it could be end of life. It's a lot of different things that people could learn about. Special events, performances, technology classes, which we're partnering with AARP and their OATS program, through Senior Planet, which I know Jason is also doing with Silver Key as well. That's being a growing area that we want to be able to promote more. And day trips, we're doing a little bit more. We used to do it all year round, all the time, but really since the pandemic, we've kind of focused on when we can get a bus. And so that's mostly been in the summer. So we're working through some ideas on that. And then our groups and clubs. This is probably the biggest thing that we're missing. We have a few groups and clubs that are meeting with us at our other locations, but we're missing like over 100 people of the community of the senior center right now until we get into the new building. And those are the folks that would come in for the meal program that would be there regularly, the card groups that would be there, the other support groups and the crafting groups. All of them are all going to come back into our one building again. And so we're going to have that community aspect that we've been missing for the last year and a half. So we're really excited to be able to provide that. Because as you would guess, there's a lot of people that live in that neighborhood that are not coming to the downtown Y, that are not going over to the West Side Community Center. Because it's a change. One, But two is like, well, downtown is scary. I've heard that, people get hurt over there. So that's their perception. So they don't want to follow us over in those other places. So once we're open in their neighborhood again, we're going to see all of them again. And all those folks that are in the apartment building, they're all going to come back. And so it's really going to be wonderful to be able to serve them once again. So completion of the new building is expected in August. We might be able to start moving our stuff in there in July, I heard, which is pretty exciting. Ribbon cutting celebration, probably by the end of August. We don't have a date yet, but that'll be everybody in the neighborhood will be invited. We'll probably have music and food and tours, and it's going to be a great time. Of course, the mayor will be there, a lot of media, so it's really looking forward to that. And of course, everyone will be invited. September 2nd is what I'm telling folks. So as far as all of our groups, our programming, possibly the meal program. So I'm going to be talking with Jason next week about that. We want to get everything going right at the beginning of September so that our full fall session will be going full speed in the new building. And finally, we can serve seniors in the community with our groups and services, which is that element that we've been missing for the last year and a half. That's almost the lifeblood of the community service that we've been offering. So there's our magazine. I have a stack of them here, so make sure you grab one. I'll just leave what I have here. Again, it has the images, also talks about the senior center, who we are, who the employees are, a little bit about us, and the kind of the ongoing things that we have on a regular basis as well. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions?
Okay with me.
Jared just gave you the thumbs up, Laura.
Okay. All right.
Well, if there are no questions, I just want to say how excited I am to see this new senior center. Some of you may know that I was on staff there for 6 years as director the last 3. And so just being able to see this new facility, larger facility, better parking, ultimately to serve our older adult community in this very special way is just really exciting. So every time I get an opportunity, I'm checking in with Tom to see what the updates are, and he gets to go over every Tuesday to see the building updates. So just really exciting to see this this grow for the community. So thank you, Tom, for your presentation today.
Thank you, and we will move on. And under 6B, it's our membership committee, and I think Melissa, you may have something.
Yeah, so I'll share a couple of updates here. So first, I would like to welcome, she came down from Park County, so made it here. We are grateful. So for folks who have not met Miss Sheila Williams, she has now joined us. She's in the room with us. And while you were out, Sheila, we did acknowledge that Park County had sent the appointment letter for you. And so we're glad to have you here. And if you'd like to just say a few words about who you are and your experience, that would be great. And you put the little, yep, there you go.
Okay. Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is all electronically new to me. So thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. They're working on our roads and I live on the end of the road. So it takes a while to get here, an hour and a half. I appreciate the opportunity to represent Park County and I hope that I will be useful in my input into the committee.
Thank you and welcome.
All right, great. A couple of other announcements I have. So many of you know Maria Cordova. Right now, she has left the Independence Center, and so she is not with us here today. And she's kind of thinking about whether she's going to want to continue on as a member at large with us. She was technically a member at large, but she really was kind of here as the voice of the Independence Center as well. So we will be reaching out to the Independence Center to get another member kind of sent our way for you guys to look at. And possibly Maria will put in an application again too, to stay on. So stay tuned for that. And we do have visiting with us today. Jody and I went out, I think it was a week ago, and met with some folks out in Falcon. And we have Don Kovaleski here visiting in the room. He has actually submitted an application to be a member of the RAC. And he is working with a group of people to put on a symposium out in the Falcon area. So we're happy that he's here. So RAC members, if you have a minute and Don is still here, maybe say hello before everyone leaves. And I think those were my couple of announcements. So with
Great.
that, I think that's
Thank
it.
you. All right. C is the Strategic Review Committee, and Laura, I don't know if you have anything to talk about.
We have no update, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. And D is the TRS Subcommittee, and I think Jody is going to update us on carryover information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, just a little bit of background. What carryover is and how that's managed. So our two primary sources of funding are state funding under the State Fund for Senior Services. That's under the Older Coloradans Act. And then our federal funding is under the Older Americans Act. State funding has to be spent within the state fiscal year. Federal funding, though, has a caveat that any unspent funds within the federal fiscal year may roll into the following fiscal year. Now, one of the challenges that we as AAAs face is that we are administered by the State Unit on Aging, which follows the state fiscal year. The federal fiscal year is a slightly different year. And so the federal administrators at the Administration on Community Living may opt to distribute carryover funding or hold that for other projects. Traditionally, we have received carryover funding, which has been nice. That funding is redistributed to the area agencies on aging based, and it is our actual unused federal funds. So this is not a recalculation of funds across the state. These are our very specific funds that have been reallocated to us that we can spend about midway through the following year. Jared, would you mind posting putting up the slide titled PPAAA 2023-2024? Thank you. So what happens with the federal funds is federal funds at the very outset are distributed by funding part. And then those are broken down by funding formula across the area agencies on aging across the state of Colorado. And so within Title III, which is the Federal Older Americans Act, we have, as you can see here on the screen, a variety of funding parts. Each part can only be spent in particular areas. And so as part of that, we then have to distribute those carryover funds within those specific parts. This year, there were some additional state funds that came back to us for distribution. The state does hold part of the federal funds and part of the state funds to use as match against the federal funds. And so in this case, they had some unused matching funds and they redistributed those here during the carryover process. And so for the sake of this list, I'm actually going to start at the bottom. So if you see the SFSS, that's State Fund for Senior Services Admin, both state and federal admin can only be used for admin services. In this case, what we have chosen to do is actually put those admin funds right into our annual survey process to help with the cost of mailing postage, and managing that. For those of you who are not aware, there is an annual requirement under the Older Americans Act to survey all clients who receive services across all of the areas that they receive services. So some folks may receive one survey, another person could receive 4, 5, 6 surveys, depending on how many services they accessed in that previous year. And so under the traditional way of doing this survey is that we, as the Area Agency on Aging, would direct each and every provider that we contract with the timeline for distribution of the survey, instructions on how to do the survey, what it had to look like, how it was to be printed, when it was to go out, when it was to be, when the surveys were responded to and those replies came in, how, when, and where to process those responses. A lot of work, right? Some of you providers here in the room have seen that over the years. About 3 years ago, realizing the extent of the work and to ensure that our region was really being represented well in the overall survey process, because there are minimums that must be met for distribution and for responses, we decided to use some of our admin funds to take that on from our providers. Therefore, the providers no longer have that expense. They can put their funds directly into services. And so here at the AAA, we work now directly with the State Unit on Aging. We manage the overall process. We can pull the reports for the mailing list. We take care of all of that internally now with these funds in order to alleviate that administrative burden on our providers. Some of the larger organizations have large mailing lists. Some of the smaller organizations, smaller mailing lists, but it's still a significant administrative lift. So about 3 years ago, we took that on. So in order to alleviate some of that cost, and because we can't distribute that out to providers, we're helping cover that cost. SFSS Services, State Fund for Senior Services line is just that. The carryover amount there that was provided, actually not carryover, this was the state match that they redistributed, was $25,773.63. State funds for senior services, as I mentioned, can be used across all services. And then going back to the top of the list, Part B funding, our general services, that can be anything from transportation services all the way to dental supports or low vision assistance. Part C1 is only, that's within the nutrition program. So Part C funding is nutrition programs. C1 is specifically in the congregate meal program. Due to some of the adjustments and changes within the funding that we received during COVID with the emergency funds, we did have a healthy balance, as you can see there in the previous year's spending. And so the $236,033.14 was returned to us as carryover funds. Part C2, you can see there had a zero balance in the carryover funds, and those are for home delivered meals. Part D had a balance of $17,955. Part D funds are specifically for evidence-based programs. Part E funds, you can see there, $25,686.01 are for education and caregiver services, caregiver services primarily. So that 25,000. And then you can see the three there that had zero back in carryover funds, which meant we spent appropriately. We spent down as we were supposed to. Part EAP stands for Elder Abuse Prevention. Part OMB is the Ombudsman Program. And what we do here at the AAA is we actually use both of those funds for the Ombudsman Program. They are not very much. It is very easy to spin that down. Unfortunately, it does not represent the actual cost of service delivery, nor the cost of producing that program. But we support that through some of our Part B and state funds. And then you can see the federal admin dollars. We used that appropriately as well. We do aim to make sure that we do spend down our admin dollars appropriately, because that is an area with the federal administrators and the state administrators that they can hold back if they don't feel that we're spending our administrative dollars appropriately. And so we're very careful and strategic in how we spend those. This year, that meant a total carryover of $385,702.39. Under the bylaws of the Regional Advisory Council, any amount in carryover over 200,000 does involve community input. In this case, calling the TRS, the Technical Review Subcommittee, Debbie was the only one available to meet, and so she did meet with us as staff. So what normally happens is staff make the recommendations. We have the discussion with TRS, explain how we got to our recommendations, and we go through a lot of conversations. Good questions. I really appreciate Debbie's questions because she has both worked in and volunteered for area agencies on aging in other states. And so she always has really good questions that keep me on my toes sometimes, but it's good. We can answer them all. And so this year has been very different, as you might imagine, given our current federal and political climate, some of the changes that, some of the rules and regs that have been changing. We were prepared to have some of this planning completed earlier this year. In January, the Office of Management and Budget forwarded out a letter in late January, which created quite an upset in planning at state and federal levels. And so we put a hold on the process. At the same time, though, because we were approaching mid-year, I was in my normal review pattern of looking at spend down across all of our providers and determining what that looked like. So typically, when I'm reviewing spend down starting at the mid-year point, I'm looking for appropriate spend down half the year. 50% is typically the target by that point. And I'm making calls, sending emails, having conversations with our providers. If there's very low spend down or if there is very high spend down, that will typically trigger a question from me to our providers. What are your needs? Why is the spend down so high at this point? And sometimes it's just general planning. Some of our providers allocate 1/12 of their allocation across, and they stay pretty tight to the monthly usage. Others respond directly to need, and so their spend down will really fluctuate. That's up to them how they spend that. We don't direct any kind of requirements around what that spend down looks like. But as I'm reviewing those spend down, that is, like I said, that triggers sometimes questions and conversations from me to understand their needs and what's going on in their environment. So with that being said, we used this very narrow allowance of funds because of the very specific parts to determine need and availability of funds. Jared, would you mind switching over to the other? And that might need to be enlarged a little bit too. Thanks, that's a little tricky. Okay. So here's what we did. As part of organizations, our providers who were reaching out to me just as, hey, I understand there's carryover. What does that look like? Do we qualify? Or through my spin down conversations and asking them questions, also realizing that there are other funds that some of our providers have access to that we'll be distributing. These are our recommendations. This is what that I recommended, and I say we. I will say that this year, because of some of the anticipated concerns at the federal funding levels and the state funding levels, I took this challenge on with some input from staff and then ultimately with Debbie's input. And so you can see there our state fund for senior services. I'm actually going to start looking, if you look at the column on the left, TSC stands for Teller Senior Coalition. In reaching out to them through spin down and carryover conversations, you can see there that they had a need through the end of June, and that is to clarify all of these carryover funds must be spent by June 30th, which is the end of the state fiscal year. They could represent a need for $25,194. The split that we did here in order to best balance the funds available were a portion from Part B and then the other portion from the State Fund for Senior Services General Services Fund. They also had need in their assisted transportation of $10,005. We pulled that from, we're recommending that from Part B. And then they also represented some assistance within their chore service area of $750. All of those from the Part B funds. You see the next provider there, the UCCS Counseling. This is their higher level counseling. They offered a range when I reached out to them to show for them to show what their need was. And so you can see there of the high part of their range of $22,500, we have $21,653.99 from State Fund for Senior Services. And $846.01 from Part E. That's actually very strategic because under Part E, it can only be used for this very specific caregiver service. And you can see below that the AAA Caregiver Respite Voucher Program for the balance. It was very strategic because because they requested a range and we could fit that high side of the range. If they're not able to use those funds because we took the bulk of that out of the State Fund for Senior Services portion. Oh, thanks, Jared. Yeah, I've got it all over here. Because we took it out of the State Fund for Senior Services, if they don't need as much as they requested, then we can do through a contract amendment, we can move those State Fund for Senior Service dollars. They have the most flexibility out of all of the funding here, but we can still help meet that need. So if they only need $20,000, we can pick up and move that $2,500 to another service provider. And I'll show you a couple other options here in just a moment where those funds could potentially be moved and part of our current and ongoing spin down conversations. So that's why we split out the State Fund for Senior Services as the bulk because of the flexibility. Now, many of you know Michelle Vaca with Community Dental. Her request to wrap out the year was $145,000. That's significant. The biggest reason for that is there was a state dental program that has been discontinued, and that was a significant part of their funds. Now, she's a great fundraiser and grant writer, and so they're expecting to make up some of that through continuing grants. But as she put there, $145,000. I let her know we don't have that to be able to be the full full coverage of that grant program that has been closed now. But under Part B, that is an allowable expense as part of general services. And so you can see there, if you start at $77,390.83 and subtract the first three numbers, that actually leaves a balance of 45,561 and 47 cents. And so we provided her that balance in funds. On to the next, Brothers Redevelopment, and part of their capable program. As I mentioned, Part D has a very specific evidence-based usage, can't be used anywhere else. I reached out to them to ask them. We've communicated with the three evidence-based programs that we have. One is still considering if they might be able to use any funds. One has said, no, we don't have the match to make up any additional funds that might come in. Brothers Redevelopment said, we will be able to use whatever you might be able to spare. And I gave them the 17,000 number, and they said, yes, we will be able to spend that down by June 30th. And so you can see the full Part D amount. Now, when I mentioned that we still have a few calls out to providers who are still considering what they might be able to use, we will respond to those through other spend down dollars that aren't being spent. So I'm in conversation with two additional providers who will have updates for their plans by mid-April. They'll be able to tell me, yes, we'll be able to spend it all, our current allocation, or no, please take away X amount. And so we will do that through a contract amendment and move that to another service provider who qualifies for the same part of funding. Silver Key Senior Services is the next one. As I mentioned, Part C1 is only and can only, this is one of the toughest areas. These funds cannot cross into another part. C1, like I mentioned, is nutrition program, and specifically within the congregate meal program. That's a lot of money to expect to be spent in a 4 or 5 month period. What we did, as soon as we received this notice that the C1 funds were there, we have already distributed these funds to Silver Key, and they're in the process of spending these down, both in addition of services, but also taking advantage to upgrade some of their equipment and their vehicles used for the meal distribution, but specifically for the congregate meal programs. And so I really appreciate the folks at Silver Key. Really, this is a definite challenge, as one might imagine, but they're really looking at this fund from a kind of like we did during COVID, is really a holistic. What do we need now, and what do we need in the future? And so this includes new freezers, some new equipment related to the congregate meal distribution. I can't remember what the hot box is called. The Cambrios that and they're on wheels, and and just really looking forward facing to make sure that that funds are being utilized appropriately. So we did go ahead and distribute those a little sooner, simply because no one else is allowed to access the funds. I can't distribute those anywhere else. As I mentioned, the Part E funding is specifically for caregiver supports. The other caregiver support that we provide funding for is our own internal area agency on aging family caregiver support center. And in this case, the balance was the $24,840. This will ensure that at least through June 30th, We don't have to put anyone on a waiting list, and we can maximize vouchers to our family caregivers. And so we're excited to be able to do that. And like I mentioned, those we know exactly where they're going to be used. And so it gives us a little bit of flexibility ultimately by giving the counseling group the $846 balance that we'll be able to adjust funding accordingly all the way up to the very end. And then I already mentioned the State Fund for Senior Services admin, which we are applying to support the cost of the annual required survey process. So the last little bit I'll share, like I said, watching spin down is a big part of what I do. If we don't spend our funds, that tells the state that we don't need them. And we don't ever want that to be an assumption. We want to look at continued opportunities to support our current providers. Within the Older Americans Act, there are very specific uses within our funds. Many of you know, especially during the time of COVID, we had the opportunity to be pretty creative in how we used our funds. We also received portions of ARPA funds, that's American Rescue Plan Act funds, that allowed us to contract both with several providers internally that we were already in contract with, but we also had the opportunity to contract with organizations and agencies outside of our norm to do some exciting projects. So as those get wrapped up, we're actually going to be putting together a booklet of photos and narrative about the different projects that we did under the ARPA funds. But this specifically, I would like to ask that normally we would the timeline or the train of the plan is that staff make recommendations, TRS meeting, TRS come to the RAC meeting, and then it goes before the board. Several years ago, we kind of turned that on its head in order to move through the process as swiftly as possible, since usually our carryover comes to us on a very short timeline. And so this, the overall funding has already gone to the board of directors. In April, I will be doing a compressed version of this to show how the funds were distributed. And so we'll come back as an information item to our PPACG Board of Directors at the April meeting with this update. And so today we're asking you to go ahead and approve where we are with these recommendations. I'm happy to answer any questions. What will happen from here is that because we already have the approval for spending from the Board of Directors, it will allow me to go ahead and start my next step of contract amendments so that those funds can be made available to the providers effective March 1, which means that they can retroactively and in this next reimbursement period go ahead and access these dollars if needed. So this does serve as the motion, the first motion to the Regional Advisory Council. And I'm open for any questions when we get to that point.
Do we need a second?
Yes, we'll need a second, and then you all need to vote. And between the second and the vote, that's usually when there's discussion and questions.
Okay, do I have a second?
Gordon Rick, second the motion.
Thank you.
Okay. And then any discussion?
Discussion, any questions?
Not necessarily a question, but more of a comment. The current administration seems to be pulling back funds on a regular basis. If we have any funds that could be pulled back, I would suggest we spend them now rather than wait for later, so that we avoid losing those funds.
Thank you for that. That is, of course, that's a big challenge because under our funding, we don't get to hold on to any funds. But to Mr. Rick's comment, yes, we are spending both carefully and because we don't want to We don't want to raise any red flags, as you might imagine. But we are spending also wisely and judiciously to make sure that we can cover as much as possible. And, it'd be one thing to say this is a month by month thing, but anymore, this is a day by day uh, uh, heart attack for me. And so I really appreciate the providers who are on task and are show that they'll be able to spend by June 30th. There's that concern also has been raised around ARPA funding. ARPA funding isn't within some of the larger that just was hitting headlines yesterday and today. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue with that path. I'll have a little more information here in just a moment in my director's report and bring you all up to date with some of that. So with that, if there are no other questions.
I do have a
Yes,
question.
please.
Sheila Williams from Park County. I guess I would be remiss in not at least asking, did Park County not ask for any funds to be carried over?
Right now, Park County is spending mostly on target. They have requested some movement through contract amendments for some of their funding to address higher levels of need, and so we've been doing that, and that's something that we do throughout the year with providers as they see greater need in certain areas. If service in one part of funding can cross to another service in the same part, we will allow that, and we typically do those contract amendments fairly quickly to allow maximum funding in that area. And so, yeah, it's all part of the spend down process, but they're spending on target right now. So.
Okay. So there's not a need in Park County right now.
Correct. They're actually sitting on some funds right now that we were just in discussion recently that would be that same conversation that I mentioned, like, do you need these funds? Do we move them into a different part of your services, or do we move those to another provider? And so right now their funding is spot on.
Okay. I don't know if this is an appropriate time to ask the question. The eastern end of Park County, in which I live, is very close to Taylor County, 4 miles. And I know Silver Key Senior Services comes to Woodland Park. Is there a prohibited use for Park County residents to come into Taylor County resident or use for that service?
Generally, no, and it's interesting you act that. So Silver Key delivers their meal program up to the Woodland Park Senior Center, so right there up behind the library. Teller Senior Coalition actually does a lot of support for folks in the Lake George area because of the weird split of Lake. If you're a Lake George resident, the next question sometimes in this environment is, well, are you in Teller County or in Park County? Because it's all within our same region, we allow that squishy boundary. If it were, I live in Teller County or I live in Park County, but I need to seek out services, say in Summit County, or down to Canyon City, that gets into a different region, therefore completely different funders, different AAA regions, and will look very different. Depending on what the service is, folks from Park County can access services, generally speaking, in Teller County or here. They could come in here and receive Medicare support. So they could call us and say, I'm not sure what Part D selection during open enrollment I should make. That's no problem. A lot of the services aren't specific to boundaries. So,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
if there's something specific, we'd love to explore that with you. But generally speaking, there's not really harsh boundaries as long as they're already within the 3-county area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So we've had
Call
a
for vote.
first and we've had a second. Can we have a vote on this carryover proposal? All those in favor?
Aye.
And before we move on, I have a couple of things since we have some possibly new members. I was wondering if you could put into perspective that amount we have in carryover over the kinds of carryover we've had in the past,
Sure.
and how this is very specifically different from how carryover has happened.
Like in the amounts.
No,
Or-
in the way we divide that up on the TRF.
Oh, sure, sure. So some of our more recent members, I think, in the room are, uh, board member, B may be the only member that, and a couple of our providers would recognize during the time of COVID, all the parts that we talked about today were dropped. We could apply funding wherever, however, a lot of wonderful flexibility in how we could do that. So we didn't have to consider the funding by parts. We could distribute as much food as we needed to wherever. We could deal with the transportation, and of course during the time of COVID there were issues with transportation, and so we were able to pick up those transportation dollars and move them into home delivered meal funds or other programs that were still able to or had to be ramped up during the time of COVID. Now that we're out of this with the major disaster declaration that was rescinded now about a year and a half ago, all of our funding has to be distributed at the original allocation by part, and then any carryover coming back to us has to be distributed by part. Traditionally, Region 4 has had a significant carryover amount, and 2-3 times as much as what we saw to what we're addressing today. Last year, in fact, which represents the previous federal fiscal year, the amount was so low that it didn't even come up to, it was like $180,000. Our providers did a really great job in making sure that they spent down appropriately. And while that does come under the $200,000 mark that requires TRS engagement and RAC member engagement, we like to have that open book, as it were, and so we engaged our TRS as part of the process anyway. And so for that one, we were back to parts, and it was a very small amount comparatively speaking, and we're still, as you can see here, if we had not had the C1 dollars, we'd be at about $140,000 to spend. This is really important for those of you as well who are kind of new to this process. At the federal level, like I mentioned, our federal administrators can opt not to distribute carryover for whatever reason. They don't have to give us a reason. They can say, no, we're not distributing carryover this year. We're going to use that somewhere else. If the federal administrators do approve carryover for distribution among the states and then ultimately among the AAAs in each state, the state has the option to cap how much carryover comes back to the region. By our contract, many years contract and current contract, the state of Colorado State Unit on Aging, our state administrators can cap carryover at a minimum of 10%. And they can opt to do that by part or in whole. And so it's so important for us to make sure that we don't have a lot of carryover. I've also asked providers who I've heard this kind of in side conversations, well, we'll wait to take care of that with our carryover funds, or we'll budget our carryover funds for this program. And I've had to say, no, carryover is not guaranteed. We are excited when we get carryover, even if it's the last second when we finally get the notice of carryover, we will make sure that it gets distributed. But we've asked our providers not to consider this as yet a second funding. And so, yeah, we're working diligently to ensure that we don't have very much carryover so that those funds do come back to us within our region. If carryover is capped, it gets distributed to another AAA somewhere in the state of Colorado based on their need. And so that's kind of a bit, and I'm always happy to answer questions. It can be complex sometimes in this kind of environment. If you have questions, feel free to stop me and ask. With that, we have the vote and we're ready to go. So I have my marching orders to get our contract amendments up to date and ready to Melody, our Associate Director and Contracts Administrator, who in turn will get those through the process and update the systems and notifications out to our providers once their contracts are up to date. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Well, she just gave me the elbow, so we're going to go right into the director's report. Okay. This is one of those reports where I feel like I'm a real Debbie Downer, Donnie Downer, however you want to call it. Everyone is seeing the news, the concerns around program funds, budget deficits. So we have a significant budget deficit at the state level that it ranged anywhere in the planning time from about 600,000 or 600 million to $1 billion. The most recent that the JBC, that's a Joint Budget Committee, is working from is $1.2 billion deficit. The budget, the long bill from the state of Colorado, which is effectively the budget, the state budget, was to be presented on Monday. We found out that the JBC is still working on that, and it was not released on Monday. I give you that context because several weeks ago would have been normally when we would open our budget planning documentation to our providers to enable them to start the next year's process. So we're approaching the midpoint of our 2-year contract period. Normally at this mid-year contract, they don't have to go through an RFP process, but they do have to go in and update. We actually give them the opportunity to update their budgets. That can be to represent and to change things around fuel costs, service delivery costs, material costs, anything like that. Allows them to adjust their budgets within their previous year allocation. Okay, so it's not additional funds, but it's adjusting the funds that they do have and allows that process. And then because this is not a second contract for this second year process, it's an option letter. It allows us to move through our process to come to that option letter. Effectively, we deliver that option letter to them. There are no signatures, there's no new contract, anything like that. As part of this process, we have heard continually from our state administrators. In fact, we shared this at our January quarterly provider meeting of the anticipated cuts that we may see across all funding, just in anticipation and planning. In January, because we didn't, our meeting was about 2 days before the OMB letter came out from the feds, we shared that there was a recommended 10% planning budget cut for the state budget, and that was anticipated because there were just so many unknowns at that state budget level. So we advised providers, as we get closer, of course, we'll be in contact, and you might as well start looking at your overall budgets, looking into the July 1 start of the fiscal year. Just what would 10% look like? And we gave them the freedom. To adjust that. They could trim a whole program if that accounted for 10%, or they could trim 10% across the board. We gave them the freedom to determine what that could look like. Fast forward into late January, February, we have since heard, and just most recently on Monday, and I will say that all of this has been communicated with our providers. through email. Because we don't know, even under the current continuing resolution at the federal level, states flat funding, we were included in, we being the Older Americans Act, was included in the continuing resolution, which is effective through the federal fiscal year. So that's September 30th. There's possibly flat funding there. However, the state budget has not been determined, so we don't know what our state funding picture is going to look like yet. Our state unit on aging is has been extremely supportive in the last 7, 8, 9 months with some new staff and some new procedures. One of those has been to be extremely supportive and have conversations with each of us as AAAs. For those of you who might not know, there are 16 AAAs across the state of Colorado. Our state unit on aging is based out of the Colorado Department of Human Services. And we've had a lot of tough conversations, challenging conversations, but ultimately very supportive. We can ask some tough questions and know that, you know, our funding isn't in jeopardy by asking tough questions, you know, that kind of thing. Even as most recent as Monday, when we had one of our regular meetings with the State Unit on Aging, they have asked us to take an extremely conservative approach in planning into our next fiscal year contract with the state. And what that simply means is that the State Unit on Aging, so kind of a big picture process, Older Americans Act funds are filtered to each state, wherever that State Unit on Aging resides. So for the state of Colorado, that's the Colorado Department of Human Services. The State Unit on Aging manages those funds. They manage those funds, and then the state funds that come into the State Unit on Aging are managed and distributed through what's called a federal funding formula. It's a complicated algorithm, but at the easiest way to describe it, it's by population, by need, rural versus urban, etc., and a lot more points to that. But the federal funding formula is how that funding is determined. As the State Unit on Aging prepares budget and budget planning, if there is no federal budget determined yet, when they need to continue moving forward with budget, the State Unit on Aging can request a maximum of 75% funding authority to continue moving forward with the budgeting process. We have shared this with our providers and asked them to look at a 25% cut in planning. We'd really hope to have different news after Monday when the budget was supposed to drop. We don't have that. And the State Unit on Aging has encouraged us to continue moving forward with the 75% plan, because we can't promise 100% of last year's funding, even if everything stays flat. Even if the JB says, no, we're not going to cut state fund for senior services. We believe in them wholeheartedly. The maximum that the state could fund until things get resolved is 75% of last year's budget. So we've asked our providers to begin planning. What would 75% look like for you? And again, the same conversation. You can cut a program, more than one program. You can make that cut across all programs, all of your current allocation, assuming things stay flat. So where we are today is that we've had to postpone opening our budget planning documents because we've been waiting to hear from our state administrators on the actual amounts that will be coming to us. They have provided some They provided one during that meeting. They provided kind of a working number. And the only number that was reduced was last year's 2 million statewide amount through Senate Bill 40 that was retracted in the budget planning this year. For us, that equates to about $200,000 that we will not see because of the 1 year usage of the Senate Bill 40 funds. But where we are today is that our staff are diligently prepping the budgets within OASIS. That's the budget system that allows providers to go in and manipulate their overall budget. So we're trimming 25%. That, and I do want to make clear, that's providers and AAA. We don't have a special dispensation to say we're not going to take that 25% either. It's important to understand that this will affect us as an area agency on aging, and it is affecting all of our current contracted providers. So as I mentioned, we had hoped to have the news and could make adjustments with real numbers. A couple of weeks ago, we let our providers know that we're putting that on hold with anticipated news from the state and the feds when, March 14th was when the continuing resolution was signed, that when the first one, the temporary one was to expire. Older Americans Act was included in the next continuing resolution at the federal level, again, assuming flat funding. We don't know what that's going to look like from the state level either. But until all of that is resolved, the state can only guarantee up to 75% of last year's funding across both funding sources. So within the next couple of days, and I see we have a couple of providers online, and we have a provider here in the room. Within the next couple of days, you'll see an update letting you know that OASIS, the budget system, is open and available for you to access. We'll give new deadlines. We are extending the deadlines a little bit since we've had to postpone the opening, and kind of next steps on how to plan and what to put in there. Now, what I will add to this, because I don't want to leave it there, that's a terrible way to stop my report. What I will share with you is that, just like I mentioned, where we can reallocate funds during a year, affected through contract amendment, effectively, once things get settled and we have a new funding number, both at the federal and the state level, the state will effectively do the same thing. They will do a contract amendment with each AAA and say, this is your money back, either back in or up to whatever the new amount is, and they will put that back into our accounts, and we'll figure out what that distribution needs to look like, and we will do contract amendments as well to bring those numbers back up. But right now the timeline is uncertain. The final numbers are uncertain. And so this is the way we have to go, so as not to put our services in jeopardy by overextending. We also have to consider our providers. A lot of tough decisions are going to be made here in the coming months as we start to plan what July 1 looks like. Our hope is that this gets sorted out and we can do contract amendments sooner rather than later. So everything that we're asking our providers to do right now is planning. We're not asking them to make these actual cuts right now, because right now we have our funding. Cross our fingers for those of you who can't see me. I'm crossing my fingers and knock on wood. This is for effective July 1 is what we're asking them to plan. And like I said, the easiest way for us to update those and put funds back once the state and the feds have figured things out is to go ahead and go through our process so that we're ready with the July 1 contract start, but then to come back after the fact with the new amounts, and do that through contract amendment. I hesitate to say right size or make whole because we don't know what those real numbers are going to look like, but we will feed those funds back into the network as soon as we know what those are.
And this is for July 1 through June 30th of 26.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
this is the next fiscal year. Correct.
And we don't know what's going to happen with the federal continuing resolution and what that budget is going to look like, which could be good news or could be really bad news.
Right. And there are two things. So just for your awareness, continuing with the federal continuing resolution right now is effective through September 30th, which is the end of this current federal fiscal year. And the Older Americans Act was not reauthorized in December. So while we are a 50+ year program, that is also a concern because it's not been authorized by Congress yet for this next fight. For those of you who need that context, that the Older Americans Act and other acts within the federal government, but specifically the Older Americans Act, typically comes up for reauthorization every 5 years. It was to be that was at the end of September when that 5-year period ended. So from September or earlier than September through December, with the close of the 118th Congress, there was a really, really strong push at the local, regional, state, and national levels pushing for Congress to reauthorize the Older Americans Act. And in those last minute political workings, the Older Americans Act was pulled away from the that continuing resolution that was extended into March 14th. So a lot going on. It's a wonder that we're holding it together. We're doing the best that we can given the circumstances, finding the best ways to plan, given the uncertainty, supporting our providers where we can, and also realizing that we're kind of all in this together because the same trimming and planning and budget planning that we're asking our providers to do, we will be doing the same thing here at the Area Agency on Aging with our internal services. So more to come as we hear more. And I appreciate those of you who reach out in some of our updates. I'm always available for questions, even outside of this meeting, but do keep them one-on-one. Just as a reminder, please do not reply all to emails that go out from me or from Melissa because of open meetings law. We have to be very, very careful. So if an email comes out from one of us and you can see that there are multiple folks on there, especially fellow RAC members, please be sure to reach out to that staff member directly, either by a direct email or a reply only to that staff member, or a phone call. We're
Yeah,
happy
and
to
and
answer
that's
that.
tough because we don't, especially the subcommittees, we don't get to see what other people are saying.
Right. So,
on
and
the
that's when we'll
subcommittees.
call a meeting and we'll have that discussion appropriately within that correct environment. So we're not putting our programs or our funding in jeopardy. We want to be very, very careful with that. So, Madam Chair, the last couple things I'll let you know just about general Area Agency on Aging services. We're currently in our annual assessments process. We visit every single provider in person and do their annual audit. This is also required under our contract under the Older Americans Act and the Older Coloradans Act. That includes both program and fiscal assessments. And then I want to share that we do have a staff member retiring. Melanie Hendrickson has been with us for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. She is our direct services supervisor retiring. Her last day will be next Friday, April 4th, and we have a new direct services supervisor hired. She will begin the following Monday, April 7th. And so just a lot of new and exciting things coming up. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And for my report, first, I just want to really, really thank all the staff here at the agency. This has been really trying times. and it's constantly changing, and they are doing their best to provide us with the information we needed. I was very pleased when I sat in on the carryover fund meeting because everybody who requested extra carryover funds got them. And the only agency that didn't get all of what they wanted was Community Dental. And I think that's just really good. I was really impressed with all the work that the staff did on that. And I wanted to thank everybody. The other thing that I just want to do very briefly, because we have a couple of new members, is just talk a little bit about what these subcommittees do. The membership subcommittee obviously attempts to find more people interested in participating in our regional advisory committee. And I think now we've grown. I think we're going to be almost maybe 10 people, which is really good because it had been really low for a while. The strategic review committee, where Laura is our chair, every 4 years, area agencies have to come up with a new strategic plan. And this strategic plan is ending, I think, in 2026. Is that correct? And there's a whole process that area agencies have to go through to develop a new 4-year plan. Bee did a lot of that. She was chair at the time, and we're glad she's really on the rack because she can help out with all of that. I will not be chair after this year, but I will participate.
And I will clarify, Madam Chair, if I may, actually 2027, about gave me a heart attack there.
Oh.
So this current plan, this current plan is effective through June of 2027. We will begin the process here very soon, because for those of you who have participated in it, it does take about 15 months. It's an extensive process because of the amount of outreach that we do and the data we
A lot
collect.
of meetings,
Yeah,
getting
a lot of meetings.
input.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
okay, I had to put that
And
out there.
that's
It's
what
like, oh
what I
no.
was thinking of all the planning we have to do in 2026. And just for the TRS, which is the Technical Review Subcommittee, and that subcommittee basically assists staff in some ways by looking at all of the monies that come in and how they divide them up, and the proposals that all of our subcontractors make for those funds. And that's not going to start then until after this next year, because we do a 2-year plan. So in June of 2026, we will be, I think, having a new request for proposal going out.
They'll actually, the new RFPs, request for proposal, will actually go out this fall. Because the new contract period begins July 1 of 2026, which will be June 30th, 2026 will be the end of this current 2-year contract period. So we'll actually put those RFPs out. We're looking at, traditionally they've gone out around October, November, but that puts a lot of expectation on folks at the holidays, their special meetings, vacations, that kind of thing. So we're actually looking at ways that we can compress that cycle a little bit, maybe make it a little bit earlier in the process for folks to be able to get their information into the system a little bit sooner, so that they're not trying to do that at the end of the year and during the holidays. So it's unfortunate that's when it typically is. There's not really a whole lot of way to get around that. But so we're going to try to do a little bit, but already this fall. Yeah. Wow.
So, and again, new committee members can look at this or get more information. I know Melissa does a presentation on the entire area agency and what it does and the subcommittees. And so folks will get to decide if they want to participate in any of those. But I thought this was kind of a good time to summarize some of that. So that's the end of my chair report. So thank you for listening. I don't think we have any discussion items.
Well, Madam Chair, if I may, it's not really a discussion item, but I do want to share something that I forgot to share in my report. Next week, actually, I leave tomorrow afternoon. I'll be in DC most of next week. It's the annual U.S. Aging policy briefing. I do serve as a board member of the U.S. Aging National Advocacy Group for AAAs across the U.S. So very excited to be a board member with them. Annually, about this time of year, end of March, early April, they hold their aging policy briefing. They have presentations from all different departments around administration on community living and different speakers, all related to policies around the national policies around aging. And so we're really excited to receive that. They've actually compressed our time this year, which is really great, because they're squeezing what's usually about 2 days into about 1.5 days, because a part of our policy briefing is to specifically and intentionally go what we call make hill visits. We have, and we've really coordinated strongly on the last couple of years as AAA directors who are able to attend by coordinating together. So instead of each of us heading off, and all three of us trying to make an appointment for Senator Hickenlooper's office, for example, we coordinate and we make that visit together. There's a lot to be said for each of us taking our 7 minutes for our full 25-minute visit to express the needs of funding and overall Older Americans Act continuation of services at the federal level. And this really gives us that opportunity to by coordinating that. So we already have meetings scheduled into Hickenlooper, Bennett, Neguse, Pedersen, and Crank's office. So we have 5 hill visits that will be across those 2 days to visit and express the needs of our older adults, not just within our region here across our 3 counties, but also across the state of Colorado. So I apologize that I forgot to
that's
mention
okay.
that during my
And
direct
those will be
report, but
important when the
very
feds
important.
are coming up with their.
Yes,
new
and
budget.
really understanding some of that, sometimes they see the larger, Older Americans Act, but what does that really mean? And this is our opportunity as AAA directors and staff to be able to express that to our state legislators and our local legislators. Like I said, Representative Pedersen represents Park County, Teller County, and into the Denver region, as well as some other counties on a little towards the center. So there'll be 2 directors who will be specifically from her region that will be able to speak to their staff. I will say that Representative Pedersen is a wonderful champion for older adult services. They're very responsive, and I have noticed they come very well prepared. Her staff comes very well prepared to our meetings, and so we love that because we can have those really strong conversations and not have to introduce who we are yet again. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to next week. That's become a big part of my role, both at our regional and state and federal level, is making sure that we have that state and federal advocacy for our older adult programs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Debbie,
Yep.
could I be recognized?
Yes.
And I probably should have asked this question, Jody, before. One of my concerns related to this environment of withdrawal of funds is the whole issue of contracts. Don't we have contracts with all these providers, and does the state have contracts, et cetera? I mean, are people talking about that?
Sure. I think I know where you're going with that. And, I think kind of the question, if I may
Reframe it.
rephrase or reframe that, is if we have a contract, aren't we required to pay them? Aren't we required to do these services? Some of the language actually within the contracts all point back to based on funding, based on availability of funding, or based on reimbursements, because everything that we do, both at the state and the federal level, are based on are through a reimbursement model. And so even though we may have a contract, even though a provider has a contract with us, it's all fully dependent on the actual funding coming into either into the state, coming and making being available to us as the contractor at the, so we act as the contractor with the state. Our providers are subcontractors with us, and it also there is language in there so that yes, there's a contract, but that contract in this environment doesn't mean an absolute guarantee. And that's part of my heartburn and part of the concerns and why the state is approaching this is the best way that we can meet our contracts, but within that 75%, because that is the maximum spending authority that the state unit on aging can request from the state to cover both federal and state funds. So the state is committed to providing up to the maximum allowable 75%, even if the feds don't have things sorted out yet. So it does give us a little bit of breathing room to continue moving forward until the feds have things sorted out. But the state is committed to recognizing and honoring those contracts with us as AAA providers and AAA services across the state at that 75%, because that is the maximum spending authority that they can request from the state fiduciaries.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome.
And I think that that's certainly different from all the stuff that's going on within the federal government about like USAID, for example, that supposedly all this money was contracted to them and then it was pulled away. And this is a different.
It is an odd kind of, somebody called it a pewter lining. You know, it's not even a silver lining, but a pewter lining is because our funding comes through the state. The state is committed to recognizing those obligations and funding those obligations, but at the maximum that they're allowed. In this case, 75%. And it's bear with me for a moment because it's a tongue twister. It's 75% spending authority based on the average of the previous 3 years federal funding. So they take that previous three years federal funding, take the average of that, they can only request up to 75% of that. So we are appreciative of the fact that we can at least access that regardless of what is happening at the federal level, so that we can continue forward providing at least minimum and core services to those who need it within our region, and we can stay connected with our providers even at that 75% level while we figure out how and wait for the final numbers to come to us.
That includes all the additional monies for the COVID funding that was.
So COVID funds would not be included in that. ARPA funds.
In that
Yeah,
figure.
we would love that. Yes, that'd be a beautiful number.
Would be the 3-year average.
No,
would be
this
really
is
high.
right. So this is specifically the Older Americans Act and Older Coloradans State Fund for Senior Services figures that are used in that.
Yes, Laura.
Thank you. According to what you just said, and let's skip the COVID, skip the ARPA, but as budgets tend to go, the last 3 years probably were not 75% of what today is. Okay, so yeah, so you see where I'm going with that.
Yes,
So-
I know exactly. So our spending power today is far less than it was 3 years ago. Absolutely recognized. And that's why several years ago, the cost of doing services, the cost of materials, cost of goods have increased substantially. And so that is something that we recognized several years ago when we were reworking and going into a 2-year budget cycle, is to make sure that, and of course, this was before all of these kind of discussions, but we recognize the need as costs changed. We wanted to make sure that our providers had the opportunity to adjust their budgets within their allocations instead of making them work within a 2-year annual span, a 2-year contract span, and holding to costs, halfway through that contract that were completely irrelevant from what they started off with. And when they had, keep in mind too, because of our cycle, they're planning these budgets a good 6 months before the contract period begins. So they have to base that on actual numbers then, and have to be able to show, because of course that's what then goes before the technical review subcommittee and the staff. And so they're already being asked to forecast from 6 months away from the beginning of a contract period. And so when we decided to come to the 2-year contract period to alleviate that every year contract process, because we would get to signing the contract and being ready to go in July 1, and in October, by the way, it's time to start again, so we went to that 2-year process to help alleviate some of that administrative burden, but we also recognize we need to give our providers an opportunity to adjust their budgets, even if it is within that allocation. I will say that we have had providers come and go, which sometimes frees up funds. We have had providers pull back on their service delivery and free up funds. And so that's also a really great opportunity for us to reallocate those funds to ensure that we're using our spend down as appropriate. And so everything, the things that we do, especially over the last 3-4 years, have been very strategic in making sure that we're both maximizing our dollars, providing support to our contractors, and alleviating as much administrative burden, because we recognize that these funds are already challenging to manage. We recognize that we provide a lot of training and a lot of support, but we also want to make sure that they have as much funds to serve the community, so to serve their client base as possible, and alleviate some of that administrative burden.
And we've heard that during presentations, cost of food has
Mhm.
gone up astronomically, cost of gas, all those kinds of things are affecting how much direct service they can actually do.
Thank you.
Yes, Gordon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize, but I've got to leave here in a few minutes. Our next meeting is scheduled for
April 24th.
I am going to be traveling that day and will not be able to attend either in person or virtually. And I just want to make sure the organization knows that for when we're trying to establish a quorum. I cannot be here. I apologize.
I shared that information. I don't think that will be a problem, but we do have Zoom. I mean, if you can,
I'm driving
okay,
through to North Dakota, and
okay.
signal's not exactly ideal for that sort of thing.
So our next meeting, going on to the meeting schedule, is April 24th. Our next RAC executive meeting is April 2nd. And I can't remember if you said, Gordon, that you would be able to be here for that. Okay, super. And I don't have when the PPAG
PPACG next meeting is April 9th. It's always the second Wednesday from 9. It's scheduled 9 to noon. It seems we have a competition between current chairs and past chairs to wrap up. They're trying to beat each other out. It's kind of exciting to see how swiftly they're moving through. But typically the meeting goes until about 11ish, but it is scheduled 9 to noon here in this main room.
And I have 3 announcements to make quickly. So first, I'd like to just let folks know that we are doing our Medicare 101 classes again, both virtually and in person. It's a series of 4 classes. It starts next Thursday. There's a flyer on the back. So for people who are, out and, in different counties, people can Zoom in and take part in that Medicare 101. Second, we have a presentation on transit happening at the Ruth Holly Library in April. We have a couple of transit providers that are coming to that. And again, this is really more focused for kind of the Colorado Springs area, not even really Calhan, unfortunately. So for our rural people, apologies for that. Thrilled to see Kathy Lowry still on, because we know that Teller Senior Coalition does a lot of transport up there. But this is again focused really on Colorado Springs. And then the last update is there's a binder on the back table here in the meeting room. Joe Ruth is working on a regional history photo archiving project. And we do that twice a month in here. We have had some other volunteers join her. It's really neat. If you have a minute before you're leaving, take a look in the binder. Basically, the Gazette has published for years this look back photo, and Joe has saved those over the years. And people are coming in and literally going through them and organizing them by decade. And it is really cool. And Pikes Peak Library District and the Pioneers Museum are going to, one of those two are going to be the final holders of these binders. And it's really neat to see the pictures and have them all come together in one place. It's pretty impressive. So if people wanted to ever come and join and see Joe, she's here twice a month working on that with other volunteers. So those are my 3 announcements. Thank you.
And with that, we'll adjourn our meeting.
Thank you.